Hello and welcome to the i3 podcast. My name is Wouter Klein and I'm the Director of Content for the Investment Innovation Institute. For more information about our educational forums for institutional investors, please visit our website at www.i3-invest.com. There you can also subscribe to our complimentary newsletter i3 Insights, in which we discuss investment strategy and asset allocation questions with asset owners around the world. Now, as you all know, we love our disclaimers in this industry, so here's ours. This recording is for educational purposes only. It does not constitute financial advice. Please enjoy the show. Welcome to the i3 podcast. I'm here with a return guest, Will Liang. So Will is Executive Director of MA Financial Group and a former Head of Technology for Macquarie Capital, Australia and New Zealand. And he is deeply engaged with the topic of AI. And even not too long ago did a TEDx talk about AI in Sydney. And I had a look on the website and it describes you as a technology optimist. Are you an optimist on technology?
Oh, yes, I am. Absolutely. Good to be here again.
So today we're going to talk a little bit about DeepSeek. Is it really all that it is promised to be? So I know you had a bit of a play around with DeepSeek. What are sort of your initial impressions, especially compared to ChatGPT?
I have, so DeepSeek was released in early December. So it has been a bit of a time. And also they've released one model in December and their reasoning model in January. So I had a play when both models were released. Very impressive. In particular, I'm impressed by their reasoning model. Partly because the reasoning model is only so far been developed by OpenAI, right? So they've developed, they didn't tell anybody how they did it. And they have the monopoly there. But DeepSeek came out with a reasoning model almost as good. Very impressed. And then certainly a lot of people like it because we saw it was atop the chart for Apple's App Store.
Yeah. So when DeepSeek came out, we saw there was quite a bit of commotion around it. I think NVIDIA dropped something like 600 billion in value on the day it came out. It was a record, I think, for Wall Street for a one-day drop. But basically the premise was DeepSeek was built with sort of minimum resources. So low cost, trained in a relatively short time and using chips that are not the state-of-the-art chips, partly because of a ban on these chips. But then as time went along, there's some more information comes out and OpenAI accuses it of basically distilling its system, which is sort of, lingo for copying part of its system and basically shortcutting the training process. There's also a question around whether they really used middle-of-the-road chips because apparently some companies found ways around the ban and set up shell companies that could buy it or even renting time on just Amazon WS to have access to supercomputers that partly run on NVIDIA chips. What is sort of your take on that? Is this really the revolution it's promising to be, or is it more like a hoax?
I think there's many parts to that question, right? First of all, I think many information out there are correct, and many information out there are just misinformation, in my view. So, certainly in the research paper that released by DeepSeek, they clearly stated that their training cost was around $6 million. I think it's US dollar. And that is in comparison of, if you look at OpenAI or other big companies, they would spend tens of millions or hundreds of millions of dollars training, right? So that's not the entire cost for developing the model because you need the people, the research, and buying all the equipment. So not those costs, but just the training run. And that was very clearly stated in the paper, right? That 6 million just training run. So I think quite important to compare Apple with Apple, right? I think a lot of media have been saying OpenAI spent billions of dollars on training the model. That's not comparing Apple with Apple. In any case, their cost is a lot lower, right? And partly because they essentially developed a lot of way to optimize the training, both training and inferencing, right? It's actually quite smart if you dig a bit deeper in the technical paper. So some technique, for example, when you train a model, you need to store a lot of data, right? In order to store data, you need to store them in a what they call floating point number format, right? US firms, they usually use whether 32-bit or 16-bit floating point number, whereas DeepSeek use 8-bit, right, floating point number. And that resulted in a massive saving in terms of compute and memory. So that's just one of the optimization they did. Essentially what they call the necessity is the mother of innovation, right? So they didn't have as powerful chips as the US firms because of the embargo. The chips they use a lot is H800, which is not as good as the mainstream chip, which is H100, right? So they had to do a lot of optimization to get it working. If we dig a little bit deeper on that, if you look at a particular GPU, right, there's three different things very important for GPU. One is the what they call the flops, so essentially the computing power, how fast you can compute, and the secondly is the memory, right, how much data you can store in the memory on the chip, and also the third bit is interconnect, right? This is essentially the bridge between one chip to another, how fast you can transfer data between chips. Between H100 and H800, the computing power is quite significantly lower, but memory is actually in somewhat similar, right? So because of that, they've done a lot of optimization to reduce the computing power required for training, etc.
So memory is relatively similar, and I think a key to remember about ChatGPT is that it's a backward-looking system. There was recently a paper that came out, and it looked at the application of ChatGPT in investing and in finance. And one of the conclusions was it actually doesn't use any mathematical concepts. It just remembers a lot, So that memory part is quite core to the whole system. So you're basically saying that is almost similar to...
Yeah, so at that time, obviously in terms of US ban, the measurement was mainly on the flops. But that is changing. In fact, I think the last week of Biden administration, they released the diffusion rules, which categorized the entire market into 3 different tiers. Top 18 countries, US allies, very, very little restriction. Then the bottom tier is the restricted countries like China, like Iran, like North Korea. And the middle bit is about 150 countries that has a certain level of restriction. I think it's 20% of the company's production, right? So you can't have more than 20%. And that is changing the game because that whole restriction is no longer only on the compute, but also on the memory, on the interconnect, etc.
So if we think that DeepSeek is really like a big step forward, what do you think that means for the investments behind AI? Has that taken a hit as well? Because when we look at, for instance, Meta, Mark Zuckerberg came out and he said, we think we need to invest $65 billion in the development of AI. Does that now suddenly get halved or a third?
Oh, I don't think so. I mean, I think still to be played out. The whole situation still to be played out. I don't think we see the full picture yet. But so far, we haven't seen any reduce of investment from the Max 7 as example. And they are really the biggest buyers of NVIDIA chips, for example. Right?
Yeah.
If you think about NVIDIA from a revenue perspective, there has been some, again, old rumor on the street that Singapore is a country that a lot of chips go from US to China and other countries via Singapore. and Singapore is quite a significant portion of NVIDIA's revenue. So if there's a significant ban on Singapore chips, we may see some impact on NVIDIA revenue, but I think that's yet to be played out.
But there's a whole ecosystem around it as well. So we saw the rise in interest in data centers, even in energy generation. We saw, I think it was Amazon that bought a data center next to a nuclear reactor so that they had guaranteed power. If it turns out that you need a lot less of it, then potentially there's a whole part of the economy that might have less demand.
Yeah, I that's true. Also, at the same time, I think you also posted this on LinkedIn a couple of weeks ago about this Jevons paradox articles, right? So essentially, there's an economic principle behind this. I think back in the 18th century, this economist, I think his name's William Jevons, that said the steam engine efficiency was increasing. So for each unit of steam engine, the requirement for coal reduced, right? However, the entire market demand for coal has dramatically increased because there's more people, more organization, more industry jumping into steam engine. I actually think this is what we're seeing right now is a classic case of Jevons paradox. We'll see much more usage of AI across industry.
This diffusion or distillation, story. If that is true, how easy would it be for whenever a new model comes out to that simply be picked up by other companies and say, okay, we make a more efficient version of this? Do you think that companies are still willing to invest as much in it because it might be easily ripped off?
Yeah, distillation is actually a very common technique for model training. If you remember last time, I think in the previous podcast I did with you, I mentioned that I fine-tuned a model called Vicuña. This is a very early stage of generative AI. And that particular model is actually a distilled model from Llama, from Meta's Llama already, right? So it's a very common technique used by many companies. I think this is a bit of misinformation here. And I don't think DeepSeek R1 is a distilled model. Reason being, ChatGPT 01 is a reasoning model. It was the first reasoning model out there, but it never actually published the thinking process, right? So if you use ChatGPT 01, you'll see you type in a prompt, it tells you thinking, right? But it doesn't tell you the steps of the thinking process, right? Whereas DeepSeek R1 give you the step-by-step process of the thinking behind it, right? So 01 didn't have it, but R1 have it. I don't think that's a distillation at all.
So DeepSeek thinks out loud.
Yeah, it's actually quite funny. I definitely give it a try. It's quite personable as well. It tell you, hey, Will, I'm thinking about this. Hold on, wait a minute. Let me just break down this a little bit better. Let me double click on that topic. So it's quite humanized in a way.
Yeah, so it's maybe easier to talk to than ChatGPT.
Yeah. I saw a post online. You ask what's the number 1.11 and 9.9 and 9.11, which is bigger? Just simple question like that. They give you this massive answer showing the thinking process behind it.
Yeah. Now, of course, there have been also some questions raised about, OpenAI model being an American model, DeepSeek being a Chinese model, and the whole geopolitical questions that come into play with that. And I thought it was particularly interesting. There's been some noise around it. There was one article in Politico not too long ago that had the title, "We asked DeepSeek about geopolitics and it gave us Beijing talking points." So that sort of raises sort of that issue, does things get fed back? And then going deeper into it, apparently there is an American cybersecurity firm, Faroot Security, and on its website it says that it found code embedded in DeepSeek that was capable of transmitting user data back to China Mobile, a state-owned company. That could be potentially a cause for concern.
I'm not aware of the story you just said about the cybersecurity company. DeepSeek model being a open source model, which means anyone can download it, anyone can inspect it. I personally highly suspect that's the case because you put something in it, everyone have access to it. It will be very easily discoverable, right? So I think it's pretty dumb of them if they did that. Part of the geopolitical tension is that why do we want to send data to China? We might have concern send data to anywhere. In fact, the Australian government just announced they banned the usage of DeepSeek within government organizations. I'm not surprised. I think that's very normal. ChatGPT was also banned. You can correct me, but ChatGPT may still be banned. I don't think government employee can at work use ChatGPT, right? So it is sending data to somewhere else. I'm also not surprised models will reflect the value of a particular country or organization, whoever trained it, because the training data set will primarily be in China or in US, right? So I think that's normal as well.
Yeah, I suppose that's another point of contention, the data set that it's trained on, because I was quite amused to see that OpenAI came out and said, oh, they ripped off our model, and there's a whole bunch of people saying like, well, you used a lot of intellectual property to train your model, right?
Yeah, there's lots of memes out there. That's pretty funny. I think all these are for media attentions more than anything else. I don't think there will be any legal battle between these companies.
Well, it's as OpenAI is transitioning to a for-profit company instead of an organization, people might be a little bit more, protective of the data that goes into these models.
Yes, absolutely.
So if we say DeepSeek is the groundbreaking model that it's promised to be, what do you think does it mean for the development of AI going forward?
Look, I think a number of things. So certainly, if you think about from a AI development perspective, we definitely will see a lot of more focus on open sourced AI models, right? So OpenAI has a lot of, technique in terms of training model really, really well. But now DeepSeek has developed a lot of, or found out a lot of these techniques and released all these secrets to the public, right? I think there's a lot of talks out there saying it is the Sputnik moment that started the Cold War, etc., etc. I don't believe that. I think that's a bad way of thinking about it because Sputnik, Soviet Union developed a satellite and sent it to space. This is the equivalent of developing a satellite, sent to space, and told everybody how they did it, exactly how they built it, how to train, how to build your own, right? So I think that's, if anything, I think this is a gift to humanity than anything else. I do think it will benefit a lot to Europe and also potentially Australia, right? Because at the moment, US is leader, China is catching up, but the Europe is really lagging behind, and Australia is lagging behind. This open model from DeepSeek, I think, if used well, can really benefit countries or regions.
There was actually just a story on the ABC that apparently one of the guys that was deeply involved with the development of DeepSeek went to the University of Adelaide and to one of the other ones before he actually did an internship at NVIDIA before going there.
Yeah.
So maybe it's a global effort. From sort of your playing around with it, do you see any applications within our space, the investment space, the wealth management space?
Yeah, I think there's certainly many applications. No different from really any other language model out there, right? This is always a battle between whether you use open source model or whether you use a proprietary model, proprietary being, OpenAI. With open source model, you would have lower cost. In this DeepSeek case, is about 1/30 of the cost of OpenAI, but you would need people be able to maintain the tool, and you have to build something yourself. So you need an engineering effort right? So cost come from somewhere else. Whereas using OpenAI model is a lot cheaper. It's a lot more expensive out of the box, but you probably don't need as much engineering effort. So it depends on the size of the firm, right? Smaller firms or medium-sized firms probably still more prefer the out-of-box models, the proprietary models, whereas larger firms may prefer the open source models. We see a lot of Chinese firms in particular, a big Chinese firm they announced they start adopting or integrating DeepSeek in the last couple of weeks as well. So I certainly think from a efficiency perspective, productivity perspective, there's no burner, right? So investment management firms should be using the tool to do research, should be using it to help writing reports, data analytics. So all these different use cases, I think is a pretty no burner. Whereas the benefit of using open source model, it could be if you do worry about sending data to the United States, for example, you have the option of having a version of DeepSeek running either locally or running in your own cloud environment, such as AWS or Azure or Google.
Yeah, I saw some interesting articles where people compared ChatGPT and DeepSeek and basically gave them similar prompts and see what answer they would come up with. And I was sort of thinking, maybe that exercise should just be standard, right? You don't use one AI model, you use multiple and see which one comes up with the best answer. Perhaps, integrate it into one system to check answer and have better checks and balances there. What do you think? Is that
historically, it's been this cost barrier, right? So every single call you make to the models, especially for enterprise system, you have to build API integration with the model, and each API call is costly. But we're now seeing this dramatic drop of the API cost, right? So I think I saw a number somewhere. It's about 90% drop from 2 years ago to now. Right, so that's massive. So absolutely, I think as it gets cheaper and cheaper, we should definitely use the validating different a question or prompt from different models, and also the other way to think about it is to use one model to validate another, right? To put the output of one model put into another, to ask to validate.
Yeah. So is DeepSeek sort of a moment where this can now be applied much more broadly across industries because of a lower cost?
Yes, by itself. So DeepSeek itself is pretty low. I think the 1 million token cost is about $2 US compared to OpenAI $60. So that's a 30-fold reduction. But what's even more remarkable is we talk about distillation. But now what happened is many other companies start distill their model, creating smaller, more specialized model using this distillation technique from DeepSeek, right? Because DeepSeek is completely free to use, so they can just do that. I've seen in the last week or so at least 5 or 6 distilled DeepSeek model out there.
5.
At least 5, more than that.
Right. So when you were last on the podcast, you had this anecdote where you basically said, I used to sit in the car with my son and we were fighting over Spotify, who gets to play what. So we switched to a voice version of ChatGPT and basically grilled it on questions. Have you switched to DeepSeek yet?
Not for that purpose yet. Voice model, OpenAI advanced voice mode is still fantastic. Right. In fact, I recommend everyone to give it a try. It's fantastic. The language model itself, DeepSeek, is quite similar to OpenAI because China is really catching up. Then the other aspect we haven't mentioned is the video models, right? Video generation model, which is quite difficult to do. I would actually argue, from my personal experience, China is actually ahead of the game in terms of video generation models. So I've done some comparison between the top US model, which is OpenAI Sora, and the top Chinese model is called Kling. I would argue Kling give me a better result.
Okay, in what way?
better accuracy, better consistency. There is this little test I'm not use because to prompt something gymnastic related is quite difficult, right? You probably see this, gymnastics, 3 different arms, 5 different legs, floating everywhere. I say Clean is doing a better job on that.
Okay.
There's actually quite a bit of development in that space recently. In particular, it's research called Video Jam, that particular talking about this dynamic about different body parts and how to make it consistent. So, and that's a free research, right? So it's up to other companies to incorporate that research into their product. I think we'll see that happening soon.
Yeah, one of the things that I found interesting with seeing a lot of AI videos being put on the internet is that you can kind of recognize when it's AI because it doesn't quite move at the same pace as real life. Like it's almost like it's slow motion, but slightly faster than slow motion. And there's a sort of movement that you can pick up. It's like, oh, that's AI.
Yeah, that's right.
So is Kling better at that?
I haven't tried that particular part. The other thing very powerful about Kling is you can train your own model, right? So in particular, for example, Face, you can upload let's say 30 different videos of yourself into Kling, and Kling can build your own AI model just for you. Then from that model, you can generate, hey, I want to be a Batman running through a football court or something. It can do that pretty nicely for you.
Yeah, but maybe still in slow motion.
Yeah, but maybe in slow motion still. I'll give it a try.
Exactly. So, Will, any last thoughts before we wrap up?
For this DeepSeek event, I think for investment management industry, it's quite a bit of a wake up call, right? So we, as you mentioned, we saw this big drop of NVIDIA shares. I think that just shows there's not a lot of conviction for that particular company, right? So I think if you are an investor that's, whether it's public market or private market, that has a heavy exposure in technology, I think it's vital to really have profound knowledge in technology, right? And also not only talking about technology due diligence, right? I'm talking about ongoing technology knowledge, because the market is changing so fast, technology is changing so fast, and that knowledge is critical.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Will, thank you very much for coming into the studio, and good to talk to you again.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the i3 podcast. For more information, please visit www.i3-invest.com. Thank you very much.